Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider podcast. I am Hub Arkush, along with our Shaw Media Group sports editor, Kyle Nabors, and our ShawLocal.com Bears Insider beat reporter, Sean Hammond, together again as we are every week, and now with this special edition of our podcast for you, because as you may have heard, while it has not been made official yet by the Chicago Bears, certainly there would be a disclaimer if it wasn't true. I'm sure they're working out final contract details now and get everything signed. Matt Eberflus is going to be the new head coach of the Chicago Bears. And, guys, absolutely nothing surprising about this. We've known for some time that he was high on the list. We've all listed our favorites. He was one of mine. I seem to recall that one or both of you liked him a lot as well. It is a somewhat different hire than I know some segment of Bears Nation would like, a defensive coordinator, but a guy who is reputed to be an outstanding leader. He's an excellent defensive football coach. He is a 4-3 coach predominantly, which will be interesting, but some of the Bears personnel that is key, particularly Robert Quinn and Khalil Mack and Roquan Smith, can play in either of those systems and play very well. So I don't think that's the issue that's going to be made of it. But certainly the kind of staff he puts together is going to be key. And you have to assume, Kyle, we've been around these hirings and these things before, that when he walked in for his first interview, he already had a potential staff member list with him. He has an offensive coordinator in mind, and I'm quite sure that Ryan Poles knows who that is, having given Matt Eberflus the head coaching job.
Yeah, we've already seen a report out of, from Ian Rappaport with a potential tie. I'm blanking on the name, Sean, if you have it in front of you.
Kevin Patullo.
Yeah, the passing game coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles as a potential offensive coordinator. Actually, if you go to ShawLocal.com right now, we actually already have up a list of 13 potential candidates for the offensive coordinator job that Sean put together, and along with 11 candidates for the defensive coordinator job. That, of course, becomes the focus over the next few days.
Yeah, and I can tell you, Sean, that if the passing game coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles is the offensive coordinator, there's going to be hell to pay, because that's not going to be a real promising start. But, you can't hang the guy out for what happened this year, or whether or not Jalen Hurts was the guy. Sean, we've been on this for some time, and Eberflus was one of the first names that came up. It was consistently near the top of the list, and it felt almost certain, really, when you start to look at some of the connections that Ryan Poles has, that this was going to be the likely choice.
Yeah, it's not super surprising. I did wonder if Ryan Poles would maybe interview a couple more people than the three that he has over the last, I'm sure what has been a whirlwind less than 48 hours, however long it's been since he got in the building. But, I imagine that those three guys were high on his list anyway. I think that's part of the reason why, the Bears wanted to bring them in there. And certainly Eberflus has, I imagine he impressed the 5-person panel, because we've known for a while now that they wanted to get him back even before we had a GM locked down here. So, certainly he seems to be impressing the right people.
You guys, hold on. Sorry, I need a ruling on this to know if after going through the Nagy or Nagy thing when he was hired, I'm seeing Eberflus as the correct pronunciation. Do you guys have any idea?
I don't have any insight. I could try to look in the Colts media guide or something.
We're going to spend a couple of weeks trying to figure this out again, huh?
Yeah, it took me 10 days to figure out Joe Schoen as Joe Shane. People were pronouncing it Sheen and Schoen, and everybody was wrong. It's Shane. And so I'm sure that we will find out at the introductory press conference.
Ask the man himself.
His last name is pronounced. And we've got a lot of folks already checking in with questions and comments. We're going to get to them. We are on, unfortunately, or I should say I am on a hard stop today because of so much going on. Only going to have the next 25 minutes or so with you. So we'll get to your comments in just a minute. But to Sean's point, Kyle, I wrote about it, and I'm not backing off it. I am a little disappointed that once he had the job, that Poles didn't at least have a name or two of his own that he preferred. But this gets back to what we know about the process. I've been able to confirm with multiple sources that I'm comfortable with that when George McCaskey showed up at the airport to pick up Ryan Poles for his second interview, even though they had Elliot Wolf and Monty Osenfood also, scheduled for second interviews, they'd already decided that it was going to be Ryan Poles, and the other interviews were scheduled in case they couldn't work out a contract. And so off his first interview, Poles did enough to impress them and win this job. And again, we know going into that interview that Poles had a group of potential head coaches. Now, one of his strongest contacts is going to be Indianapolis general manager Greg Ballard, who mentored him in his earlier time in Kansas City. And I'm quite sure that Poles had talked to him about Eberflus. Now I've got a third pronunciation, however we want to do it. Let's just call him Matt until we know for sure. So I am comfortable, that he had certainly done his homework and wanted this hire. This does not feel like a McCaskey Phillips hire. That would have been Jim Caldwell, off of past experience. Not that they don't fully endorse this guy too, not saying that they don't. But the fact that Dave Tobe hasn't been considered anywhere, and particularly wasn't considered here, really concerns me, because Ryan Poles is somebody who knows him well. Dave Tobe is, every football person I talk to, and I'm talking about coaches and players, believes would be an outstanding head coach. And I really thought this would be the opening for him to at least get an interview. Eric Bieniemy doesn't surprise me as much, because we know there are concerns around the league. Not that he's a bad coach, but that he may not be the right guy. But at the end of the day, we have to go back to what we know, and that is that Ryan Poles had obviously indicated an interest, we shall say, in Eberflus, as well as Quinn and Caldwell, before he got the GM job, or I don't think it would have been the slam dunk that it was, that those guys all got their second interviews.
Yeah, Ryan Poles clearly had a list coming in here. Eberflus, we're going to cover all the bases. I'll go with Eberflus. You go with Eberflus. Sean, we got to get a little bit of a different pronunciation. Then we'll cover everything here, guys. You look at it, I think all three of us were pretty hesitant when it came to Dan Quinn. I think we all liked aspects of Jim Caldwell. We were concerned at his age, if that was a long-term solution or if that was more of a stopgap thing, which is not exactly what you want to do when you have a young quarterback like Justin Fields, is, get him in a system for 3 or 4 years, then 3 or 4 years later, whether you win or lose, you're doing it all over again. I'm withholding judgment on the hire. There was obviously some names we've discussed here on the podcast before that we really liked. It's going to come down to, you brought up their potential of Eberflus comes from a Tampa 2 style defense, and being able to move the defensive opponents you already have on the roster around. That, to me, obviously offensive coordinator is going to be a big hire, but I really immediately want to know what this defense is going to look like.
Yeah, guys, the one thing I think I would like to take off the table, because I know there are some people who are going to get stuck and hung up on it. My top 3 choices were Todd Bowles, Brian Daboll, and Matt Eberflus, Eberflus, whatever. Matt, I got to remember to just call him Matt until I know for sure. Todd Bowles and Matt are basically the same candidate, except that Todd Bowles has prior head coaching experience. But everything else that you look into about these guys, you're going to get the same pros and cons and very few cons. In terms of leader, strong leader, outstanding defensive football coach, but more than that, great organizer, great communicator. No nonsense guys. I just liked Bowles better. I don't dislike Matt. With Daboll, people got hung up on this thing that the Bears should be hiring a personal coach for Justin Fields and not the best head coach. The assistant coaching track records of both Bowles and Eberflus are better than Daboll. So, Brian Daboll's had an outstanding run with the Buffalo Bills, but he's a 22-year lifer who had 3 other offensive coordinator jobs that didn't work out so well. And so I don't like him any less, but I'm just saying that it's pretty obvious to me how in the interview process that these other 2 guys, and I don't know that Bowles, he had an interview, and according to a source there, told me that it wasn't that he didn't feel he was a candidate. He just felt leaving, that they were looking elsewhere anyway. I think they were already very much in love with Matt Eberflus. And so, as far as Brian Daboll, he's still on the street. I thought for sure when Shane brought him back in for the second interview with the Giants, that was a done deal, that was why the Giants hired Joe Shane, but he's now interviewing additional candidates. So, one of the things that I tweeted this morning, and of course the Twidiots had to jump on it, the Bears with 9 head coaching openings make the first hire. We can go back and research which one actually signs his contract first, Matt Eberflus or Nathaniel Hackett. But the point was, clearly they got their guy. It's not like their guys were off the table and they had to go for a second choice. And I think that, if you want to give them a fair shot now, both Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, that's what's critical. They got their two top choices. And so now we got to just sit back and see if they're going to work out.
Yeah, I'd much rather be one or two on that list than be the ninth team hiring your coach. Just a couple of weeks ago, Hub, we were talking about how this might be a quiet coaching carousel, and here we are with 9 openings. It's been a really wild thing to watch.
Hub, do you think Dan Quinn withdrew his name from coaching positions because he was only interested maybe in a couple spots, including the Bears, and once he realized that wasn't happening? Or, what do you think happened there?
Traditionally, guys in these head coaching and GM searches, when they withdraw their name, it's because they already know they're not going to get the job and they don't want to have it be reported that they weren't the choice. Now they can say they chose not to go as opposed to they weren't chosen. It's not always the case, but it can be the case. It could also be, listen, I've been saying this for months, and of course, everybody wants to argue about something. The Bears job is one of the best jobs out there. It's the Chicago Bears. It's if you believe that they're committed to fixing the dysfunctional football operation and they're going to get out of the way of these two guys and let them do their job. Everything else screams about what an incredible place this is to be. The heritage franchise in the NFL, the second biggest single team market, third biggest market in the NFL, one of the greatest places to live in the world. Yeah, we got our problems in Chicago. We know that, but it's a great place to be. And there is some young talent here led by what many believe is a potential franchise quarterback. And so this was a primo job opportunity for the guys coming in to interview. And I'm sure some felt even better about it once Poles got the GM job. And so in Quinn's case, it could be that this was the job he wanted, and that's why he backed. But he didn't need to do that. The point is, and now we see with the Bears jumping first or second or 1B and 1A, however you want to do it with the Broncos, he could still be available for other jobs that he'd withdrawn from. So most likely what happened there is his agent probably recommended. They knew he wasn't going to get those jobs, and that's why they pull their name out before they're not chosen.
And you talk about it being a primo head coaching job here in Chicago, Hub. Now that the Bears have hired a defensive guy, I think it puts more emphasis. It makes the offensive coordinator job a primo job. Like, guys are going to really want that position because if they develop Justin Fields, that means they're probably going to be a head coach pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And I think what you're going to see now, when you look at the success, excuse me, of Kevin O'Connell with the Rams, of Mike McDaniel with the 49ers, guys who are still coaching. Look at what Dave Ragone, I said it when he got away. I was sorry Rags got away. I had a feeling he was going to be a successful OC, and that's why, Matt Nagy retained him from John Fox, but when you see the success that some of these younger first-time coordinators are having with today's game, my guess is that you're going to be better off than going with some recycled coordinator. That's why an unknown name like, Padula, or I don't know if I have that right either, from Philadelphia would come up. Again, I don't see the results there that would make me encouraged by that. But there are other guys. Zach Taylor, who's also coaching this weekend, was never a coordinator at all. He was a quarterbacks and receivers coach, I believe, but he trained under the right people, both Shanahan and LaFleur, and so hopefully that's now where the Bears will be looking for their OC, because that's what's working right now around the league with these young quarterbacks, which is what Justin Fields is.
Yeah, guys, get over to shawlocal.com. We got those, like Kyle said, we got those lists up right now with coordinators. And yeah, I put together a sort of a hodgepodge of guys like that, Hub, quarterback coaches or guys who haven't done this job before, and also some guys who have. And it'll be fun to watch here how this develops, because this is really going to be the important first step for is hiring these coordinators, and that's going to play a big role in what this looks like offensively next year.
Yeah, it's why we encourage you guys as best we can to go to shawlocal.com to check out all the news and analysis in our Bears and NFL sections. Obviously, it's what pays our bills. But beyond that, it's pennies a day, and there's a ton of great research already done for you. So if you want to be up on some of the top names, Sean's just been all over this from the beginning, doing a great job getting everything ready for you. So make sure you get to shawlocal.com as soon as we're done here. I guess you could do it while we're visiting with you now. And you'll get caught up with some of the best names out there.
Hey, you can get the first 3 months right now for 99 cents. So head over there. Let's dive into some questions here. We're going to start with Thomas Klein here, Hub.
Tom wants to know, do I think Jason Garrett should get another shot at an OC position? Any chance Caldwell would take the OC job if he doesn't get a head coach position? You know, I mean, they're both accomplished guys. And yes, I think Jason Garrett should get another shot, Tom, but I just got done saying that I think my first choice now might be a newer, younger, more innovative type guy. Jason Garrett doesn't get the credit he should for developing Dak Prescott, but he's the guy who did that, and so, you could argue you've got as much or more to work with Justin Fields. So that would be an interesting fit. Jim Caldwell hasn't been an OC for a long time. I'm hard to, grasp the comfort level, having just lost out as a finalist for the head job. Now, that's not to say it wouldn't happen or couldn't happen. Again, there's connections all over the place here with Polian and the Colts and Poles and Ballard and all that. So I wouldn't rule, and Eberflus for that matter. So I wouldn't rule it out. They didn't work together, by the way, Eberflus and Caldwell in Indianapolis. But it feels a bit uncomfortable. Jason Garrett's not a name to ignore, but it's kind of not the category that I'd be looking in right now. I don't know if you guys agree with that premise or not.
Yeah, Garrett has the history with Eberflus, but you just wonder what he's looking for at this point, if that's where he wants to go. I know he was close to or in talks with Duke about becoming a head coach a few weeks ago. That didn't work out for him. Certainly he's a guy that I think maybe wouldn't be super exciting for Bears fans, but I think he'll get another shot eventually. I don't know. Things didn't end well in New York, but that's certainly no reason. That offense was pretty terrible no matter who was running it. Caldwell, I don't know. I would be a little surprised if that's the move for Caldwell. If he really wants to get back into coaching, maybe that's something he would consider, but I would think he's going for a head coach or bust at this point.
Yeah, and Kyle, Sean amplifies the point I was just trying to make. Obviously, Matt worked in Dallas for Jason Garrett, and when the boss goes to work for a former employee, sometimes that can work. It's not always a great chemistry thing.
Yeah, agree with you guys on Caldwell. A couple names that I want to bring up. Mike Kafka is a name that we've heard a lot this hiring cycle. QB coach down in Kansas City. Who else stood out to me when looking through your list?
Ryan Poles knows him.
Yeah, Mike Kafka again. Kafka. Yeah, I think it's Kafka. He's basically number one on my list. That was the first guy I thought of when Ryan Poles was hired. Was actually even thinking about him before Ryan Poles was hired. If the Bears hired a defensive coach, when I was looking at the kind of Kevin O'Connell, Mike McDaniel model, now he'd be out of the Andy Reid school, which isn't a bad school either. But being around Patrick Mahomes, and again, physically and trait-wise, that's the guy that is the best comp with Fields for me. I don't know if Fields has the head that Mahomes has, but Mike Kafka is a great name to look at and somebody that I hope they will consider.
I think that's a good name. Mike Rowe, Colts wide receiver coach, also served as an offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, I believe, for a couple of years, Sean, right?
Mike Rowe worked in Chicago.
Yeah, he's a former wide receiver coach in Chicago. If you're looking for a guy that has a bit more experience, you don't want someone so green. Mike Rowe seems to fit that profile. Another name that kind of moved around a lot in the NFL, but I know he's highly thought of, is Pep Hamilton. I think he's another former Bear coach, right? Bears
Pep
coach.
is highly thought of, and he turned down the offensive coordinator job in Miami because he didn't want to work for Brian Flores, and so. But yes, definitely another name to consider. Yeah, there's quality guys out there, and actually, yeah, Pep got his start here in Chicago. I don't know if you recall, but that was a lot of the memes and early jokes because he's still a very young looking guy. But when he started here, he looked like he was about 18, and I think he was in his early 30s or late 20s. But he is well traveled and has worked for some great coaches. Worked for Jim Harbaugh too, as a matter of fact. So a lot of connections there.
Timothy Wire checking in. OC for Rams is one mentioned too. Thoughts? Who is currently the OC?
Well, it's Kevin O'Connell.
That's
O'Connell.
Yeah.
But I don't know why he would leave the Rams OC job to take the Bears OC job. That's a lateral move.
That would surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, being a Sean McVay disciple is the best thing these young head coach candidates have going for them. So I'm not saying he would. Now, Matt LaFleur did leave. He was McVay's offensive coordinator for a year. Then he went to Tennessee and was the offensive coordinator for Mike Vrabel to get out of Sean McVay's shadow, and then was hired by the Packers the year after that. So, Kevin O'Connell, I suppose, could look at Matt LaFleur's, path to a head coaching job, but it still seems, somewhat unlikely to me. Just because it worked for LaFleur doesn't mean it would work again.
Question here from Mike Johnson.
Listen, Sean Desai, I talked about this yesterday on the radio. He did a really good job, for his first year out, for being as extremely unexperienced as he was. This is a guy who had 8 years in the NFL, 6 as basically a position assistant and kind of quality control guy. Only 2 is even a position coach, the safeties coach. And then suddenly at 37 or 38, he's the defensive coordinator. And when you look at losing Khalil Mack for 2/3 of the season and all the other injuries he dealt with and everything that went on around the organization, and the way the Bears defense was playing, particularly at the end of the year, I mean, you look at that Vikings game and you go in against, one of the top passing games in the league with none of your starting defensive backs and you hold them to 87 yards passing. He did a really good job. He's a Vic Fangio disciple, and that's pure 3-4 stuff. But the really good coaches can do both. I'll never forget that. The reason that Ron Rivera, well, he got let go, but the reason that Ron Rivera went out to San Diego from here was because they were running a 3-4, and he had been pegged as a Lovie Smith 4-3 guy, and proved that he could excel at both, and then eventually became a highly successful head coach. So. I think Sean Desai should get some consideration, particularly when we talk about continuity. I've already suggested I would think that John DeFilippo, first of all, John DeFilippo is a former offensive coordinator in a few places. And so I suppose he could get consideration. I don't think so because it didn't work out so well in the OC jobs, but he is a respected quarterback coach. So, yeah, I think that you look at the Bears staff and Sean Desai is one of, 4 or 5 names that probably will get at least, thought about, if not some legitimate consideration.
Yeah, worth noting too. I think I saw this morning Vic Fangio is interviewing in Jacksonville, so keep an eye on that connection too.
For head coach,
for head coach.
Okay. I'm surprised to see him. Happy to see he gets.
Another I was a little surprised to see that come across.
Kind of surprised. I kind of assumed that was going to be Byron Leftwich in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think he got a bad deal in Denver, Vic. He had that team playing really well, and he had the same quarterback conundrum that. Look at what happened to Dave Wanstead. He was here in Chicago for 7 or 8 years. They couldn't figure out the quarterback thing. And he goes to Miami, and he inherited Dan Marino, but he's also the guy that had to get Dan Marino to retire and still won 10, 11, and 10 games, and so, other guys as well, even John Fox, it wasn't until he got Peyton Manning, that he got the Broncos over the hump. So I don't, I'm surprised because I had heard reports that Vic was kind of burned out by the experience in Denver. You also have to realize that George Payton, new GMs want their own guy, and he gave Vic a year and it didn't look like it was going in the right direction, but I don't think it should completely rule out Vic Fangio. I also don't think he'll get the Jacksonville job, but they may be interviewing him to try and encourage him to come and be the DC, depending on who does get the job.
I've seen a few people comment that Sean Desai doesn't run the same defense as Matt Eberflus, and I think we need to pump the brakes on that.
We just talked about it a minute ago.
Yeah, but like people are assuming that he's going to run a Tampa style 2 defense. Like he's the head coach now. That doesn't necessarily mean he has to run that defense. If you want him to be the head coach, that's kind of what we complain about Matt Nagy is forcing. If you have the personnel to run a 3-4 and you have a good defensive staff like Sean Desai leading up, if you went that route, even if you went outside and hired someone to run your defense, doesn't mean that you have to go back to a 4-3 base defense.
Yeah, I think what you get into here, guys, is that Akeem Hicks can play in either defense, but he's a classic 5 technique and a 30 front, can go inside, play on the nose if you want him to. We assume he won't be back. It seems like a fairly safe assumption, but Bilal Nichols is a classic under tackle in a 40 front, and he's a free agent. You have to re-sign. Angelo Blackson's under contract for another year. Robert Quinn is a 4-3 right end. It's the Bears who decided to make him an outside rush linebacker in the 34. And Khalil Mack has stood up at has put a hand on the ground at defensive end. That's what he was playing with the Raiders when they traded him. Now, he is best off as an outside rush linebacker, but you could still put 4 guys in front of him and let him blitz off the outside at linebacker. So it's not like the Bears personnel wouldn't work. They're down to 1 inside linebacker right now with Roquan Smith anyway. He could be a classic middle linebacker or, 1 of 2 inside linebackers. But, Alec Ogletree's a free agent. Danny Trevathan, it's hard to believe he'll be back. So they're positioned to go either way. It wouldn't be that big a deal if they wanted to make the switch.
Let's see. We got a few minutes here, Hub, before you got to run. Do you want to go on? Do you want an offensive or defensive question here? Because we got.
We can get them both in. Let's.
All right, let's go. We had a question about Ken Dorsey. I hear good things about Ken Dorsey. I think someone asked, could we bring in Ken Dorsey as OC? It was a question earlier. 8 Hour Vibes apparently likes that idea.
It's consistent with what we've been talking about. He's a Brian Daboll guy, and Brian Daboll is hot right now. And if Brian Daboll gets a head coaching job and Dorsey's not his OC, then I'm sure he'd want to interview. And Sean, I don't know a lot about him, but he fits the description that we've been talking about.
Yeah, he certainly fits the description. He's worked with 2 really good quarterbacks in Cam Newton and Josh Allen. That's just the question. Is he going to follow Daboll? If Daboll gets a head coaching job, is he going to potentially step into that OC job in Buffalo if Daboll leaves?
Sorry, guys. They're looking up here. CJ had a question. How likely is Champ Kelly to stay, barring a promotion?
Well, I think he, again, one of my first reactions was I wouldn't be surprised if he gets elevated to personnel director, and it would make perfect sense. I mean, he's in demand everywhere. This is an interesting situation. If he isn't going to get a promotion elsewhere, one of the things that happens when you bring in a new GM, guys, is that the Bears needed permission from the Chiefs to even talk to Ryan Poles, and they have to give it because this is a promotion for Ryan Poles. But all of these front office guys, it's not like the coaches who are under contracts that run out, right around February 1st. Front office guys' contracts traditionally run from roughly May 1 to June 30 or April 1 to May 30, whatever you want. But they follow the scouting cycle, not the league cycle. And so we can assume, we know that the Bears front office people are under contract, and Ryan Poles, with everybody else, all the other teams under contract, he's not going to come in and rebuild the scouting department before this free agent and draft cycle. There will be changes afterwards, but everybody in the Bears front office right now, with the obvious exception of Ryan Pace, is going to get a three-month working interview with Ryan Poles. He may make 1 or 2 changes. He may have one guy he really wants to bring with him right now, but my immediate reaction to all of this, Sean, was that I expect Champ Kelly to be promoted to personnel director.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, they have all said really nice things about him. You get the sense that the people in charge over at Hallis Hall really like the work that Champ Kelly's doing, and he's had opportunities. He's interviewed elsewhere, so certainly that tells you that other teams see what he's doing, and that's the type of guy that you want to keep in house as long as you possibly can.
Kyle, I know that you guys can take care of everybody for a while. I have to run we've got Pro Football Weekly TV taping. I'm hosting on The Score from 7 to 9 tonight. We're waiting for news of press conferences for the Bears. And so I got time for one more question, and then I'm going to jump and let you guys take over. But if there's one more you like in there, let me.
I think we're going to wrap it up ourselves here as we have other content to get to today, guys, but we did want to get with you for at least a half an hour. And we have a question here, if I can find it. Actually, it was just asking pretty much when do we expect to hear from Ryan and Matt? What do you guys think?
Well, today is hard. I'm sure that they're still finalizing the contract with Eberflus, and he is hopefully on the phone, rounding up his staff right now, trying to get quick initial commitments. They are busy as can be. Friday traditionally is a news hole, but I think that the impetus will be not to wait, that nobody has actually heard from either Ryan Poles or Matt. So I expect there'll be press conferences tomorrow, latest on Monday. I don't think fans should be disappointed if it waits until Monday, because I'd rather have them focused on putting their staffs together and getting it right. But my best guess is that we will meet them both officially for the first time tomorrow, probably late morning or early afternoon, but that's just a guess. Sean, I don't know if you have any more intelligence on that.
I would estimate the same thing. I mean, we saw the Ryan Poles news across the Twitter feed around the late morning the other day, and they didn't make that official until probably, I don't even remember, 6 o'clock, 6 p.m., something like that. So we're still waiting word here for Eberflus's official hiring, but I imagine we'll talk to him. I think Friday would be the earliest.
Yeah, and if I could make a quick point here, Kyle, and I know I'm spitting into the wind, but I got to do it anyway just because it's so frustrating sometimes. Twitter is not news. Most of this is right. There's no question about this. 99% of it, when it comes from an Adam Schefter, you can take it to the bank. When it comes from some of the other guys, Pellicerio and Rappaport and some of those guys, it's usually pretty good. There are others who I won't name who you should ignore it rather than listen to it. But the point is, once they know deals are going to be made, then the agents get involved. This still has to happen. Josh McDaniels was going to be the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. Dave McGinnis was going to be the head coach of the Chicago Bears. That was even before Twitter, and so it isn't news because it breaks on Twitter. The Bears and the Broncos are finalizing all these things now with Nathaniel Hackett, who will be the next Broncos head coach, Matt Eberflus here in Chicago. And my guess is that that's going to take the better part of today for them to get all their ducks in a row. Some of these guys come to town without their best suit, or an orange and blue, shirt and tie. I mean, there's stuff that has to happen. So I'm confident we wouldn't have done this if we didn't think Matt Eberflus was the next head. I've now used both pronunciations. The next head coach of the Chicago Bears. Hopefully we'll find out the official pronunciation tomorrow. And I'm sure we'll be hearing from them very soon. Again, my best guess is late tomorrow morning, early tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, I would expect either tomorrow afternoon. I do think it could be delayed until Monday just because with so many openings around the league right now, you have to think that they're going to be really focused on trying to make contacts and get interviews set up and scoop up some of these guys for potential offensive and defensive coordinators before, while they have a little bit of a head start on everyone else. But Hub, yeah.
Well, let's just make one, and I'm making myself late, but I think that's a huge point because, again, this is something I tweeted a while ago. We've watched this and watched this and watched this and worried, is it getting late? The fact that the Bears were first or 1A or 1B with the Broncos, whatever it may be, it's huge because now, you got your guy. You don't know if you got the right guy, but you got your guy, and now they can get those guys and watch these dominoes start to fall now. I will bet anybody that at least 4 more of these jobs will fill in the next 48 hours because now everybody starts to worry. There were at least 1 or 2 other teams out there that liked Eberflus and Hackett, and so now they're going to start rushing to get their guys.
I agree.
All right, so I guess I usually put the wrap on this thing. Again,
you're driving the bus here, Hub.
Yeah, keep an eye on our Twitter accounts at Sean_Hammond, at Kyle Nabors, at Hub_Arkush. Whether we're back with you at 9:30 again tomorrow morning or not is hard to say right now as we wait for news as to when these official pressers will take place. I think our instinct is to visit some more in the morning if we know that those press conferences are being delayed or we're not rushing to get to them. But just watch our Twitter accounts. We will let you know. And really, guys, get to shawlocal.com because this news is going to break there. And when it breaks there, you can call it news as opposed to Twitter when you're getting rumors and tweets and reports. We really appreciate all you being here. For those of you who are with us live, you know that we do this traditionally every Friday morning at 9:30 Chicago time. You can be part of the podcast. If you're listening to it as a podcast, that's great too. And you prefer not to join us live, just get to the App Store on your phone or iTunes or shawlocal.com. At least get yourself a subscription so it downloads automatically. We will be back with you either at 9:30 tomorrow morning or as soon as we know when there is more breaking news. Stay with us on Twitter and we'll let you know when we're coming back next. Thanks for being with us today.